So, you want to be one of the few, the proud, the Marines. You're gonna have to follow some ground rules, but whatever you do, keep your hands out of your pockets. To be a Marine, you've got to be able to fight, and being young helps. Every military branch opens enlistment to those over the age of 17. The Army's cutoff is 35 years old, and the rest of the branches are open to those in their early 40s. But for the Marines, the oldest you can be to enlist is 28. Those Marines who want to be an officer must be at least 20 years old. You've also got to be in peak physical shape. The initial strength test asks male applicants to do 3 pull-ups or 34 push-ups in 2 minutes, a 1.5-mile run within 13.5 minutes, and a 40-second plank. Female applicants must manage to do 1 pull-up or 15 push-ups in 2 minutes, the same run within 15 minutes, and the same plank. As for the Marine Corps physical fitness test, it subjects Marines to 2 minutes of crunches, pull-ups, and push-ups to the maximum repetition, and a timed 3-mile run, the most asked of any branch of the military. So if you're going to join the Marines, you might want to hit the gym. You've also got to be a U.S. citizen or a green card holder that is fluent in English to enlist, and a high school education or equivalent is a must, but that's just the beginning. The U.S. Marines are fighters, and that identity is all over their online material. So too is a call to uphold the standards and values of the Corps. As one would hope for the world's most powerful military, the Marines, and all branches of the military really, heavily emphasize firearm standards. Each branch shares key instructions and guidelines for the handling of their weapons, phrased slightly differently. For the Army, it's an acronym, THINK. For the Marines, it's the saying, treat, never, keep. That might sound like gibberish, but it breaks down like this. Treat every gun as if it were loaded. Never point a weapon without intending to fire it. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire, and keep the safety engaged until you're ready to fire. Beyond these basics, Marines are trained on how to properly carry their weapons and store their ammunition, and how to position their weapons when faced with various threats. Warrant Officer Ron Hathaway brings up another rule to treat, never, keep in an instructional video for the Marines website.
The unwritten rule that we follow a lot is know your target what lies beyond an image away.
He stresses that every member of the Corps must follow safety rules, including the housing of weapons. Anyone living in barracks with the rank of sergeant or below must keep their weapons in an armory. Weapons stored on base must be locked away and kept with their registration forms. Dressed up, Marines look pretty sharp. Their dress uniforms cut a striking feature with the contrast of dark and light and the blood stripe distinguishing officers above a certain rank. That blood stripe is a big deal, too. It's a ceremony to get it, and it honors a battle from way back in 1847. But red, white, and blue uniforms with immaculate and sharply delineated colors aren't going into combat. In the field, you'll see Marines with a completely different look. A combat utility uniform with a camouflage pattern, colloquially known as cammies. But you aren't likely to see Marines wearing their cammies away from active duty. In 2007, new regulations were issued governing how Marines should present themselves, whether or not they were on duty. Obviously, Marines are expected to dress professionally, and some of the stipulations seem like no-brainers. They're forbidden from having gem-studded teeth or going out with a bare midriff. But when it comes to cammies, which have long been banned as off-base wear with exceptions made for brief stops, these were now forbidden to be worn in any off-base situation outside of an emergency. The penalty for violating the regulations on public wear is relatively minor, although repeated infractions can get a Marine stuck on base with a pay cut. But having to keep out of sight while in cammies can be an inconvenience. Marines going from work to home who don't have a chance to change can't get out of their cars to pump gas or pick up a meal. When the regulations were enacted, fast food restaurants near bases reported a spike in drive-through line lengths. Because, come on, who's going to tell a Marine they can't have a cheeseburger? Restrictions on what uniforms Marines can wear in public is an obvious rule, but it's far from the only one that governs their appearance. If you've ever met a Marine, you might have noticed that their hands are always out in plain sight, never tucked away in their pockets. Sailors in the Navy can put their hands away, but Marines can't. That's by design. Unless they need to retrieve something, Marines aren't allowed to put their hands in their pockets, at least when they're working in a garrison environment. That detail about their environment would seem to suggest that Marines don't have to rigidly adhere to the rule about not using pockets all the time. There was an entire article published in Task and Purpose in 2021 examining the wording of the regulation, and the conclusion was that there was an improper use of semicolons. What? The regulation looks like this. The use of chewing gum, chewing tobacco, cigarettes, hands in pockets, or the consumption of food or beverage while walking in uniform or while in formation are examples of activities that detract from an appropriate military presence. According to a Marine spokesperson, the interpretation of the semicolons here is that there should be no hands in pockets, period. But task and purpose, and grammar rules, kind of say that it should be read to include that whole while walking in uniform part of the sentence. Either way, you're probably not going to get very far arguing with the Marine Corps Uniform Board. But some commanders have told their people that in harsh weather or cold conditions, there's no point in exposing your hands for the sake of a uniform appearance. Guess that goes to prove it. Semicolons are serious business. A force sent to Australia along with French troops struggled during training in heavily vegetated terrain. To work around the reduced visibility, Marines attached reflective belts onto drones to help them get around. You need to be able to see Marines in the dark, like literally. A special combat center order specifies that any member of the U.S. Marine Corps who works outside of military formations and during hours of low visibility is required to wear reflective material. At the Marine Corps base Quantico, this means wearing reflective gear between the hours of 4 p.m. and 8 a.m. Road guards responsible for formation runs face the same requirement. A belt or vest is suggested, but the Combat Center's Provost Marshal says that anything works, as long as the clothing has reflective material that makes the Marine visible to drivers. This clothing regulation is obviously about safety. Marines, just like anyone who steps out for physical training in low lights, run the risk of an accident with a vehicle that can't see them. Mandatory reflective clothing is meant to keep the Marines safe from accidents, though the scope of the rule has been relaxed over time at some bases. At one point, Marines at Quantico were required to wear reflective clothing anytime they went out, biking, running, walking, or jogging. That rule was later changed to low light and low visibility. And there are other uses for reflective gear aside from personal safety. It's a go-to scene for movies, TV shows, and cartoons that spoof military life. The almost ritual shaving of new recruits' hair.
Okay, if you stop here, I think I can still make it work.
Soldiers wearing their hair short, just shy of clean shaven, is a long-standing tradition. Some sources trace it back to the Civil War, when shaving soldiers was an effective way to combat lice outbreaks. It's endured, becoming a rite of passage for new recruits, at least for men, though there is some practicality behind the haircut. The longer a soldier's hair, the greater a chance obscures their vision, or it gets caught in something. For male recruits, the Marine Corps has taken the tradition of short hair and regulated specific cuts, lengths, and fades. What the Marines' website refers to as the bulk of hair can't be any longer than 2 inches in length, and no section can exceed 3 inches. Hair long enough to part must be parted off-center. Hair dye must be a natural shade if used, sideburns are forbidden, and any style must be blended or faded without a sharp angle. Women serving in the Marines are permitted more variety in hair length, and if their hair is long enough, they can wear half ponytails or half braids. Male Marines have to get plenty of haircuts within a year to keep their hair within regulations. But contrary to claims spread far and wide on the internet, Marines do not have to get their hair cut every week. In fact, there's no rule at all about how often you cut your hair, so long as it's well groomed and short enough.
It'll look longer when it's combed out, right?
All branches of the U.S. military must follow the country's Code of Conduct, which was first developed after the Korean War. A combination of law and tradition, the code spells out how military personnel must behave. It governs both the treatment of prisoners of war taken by the United States and the behavior of American forces when in captivity. It came about through an executive order issued by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, no stranger to combat situations himself, and was immediately incorporated into military training. Part of the Code of Conduct is meant to prepare American troops for the possibility of capture and imprisonment, based on the experiences of POWs from the Korean War who ended up cooperating with the North Korean government. The code instructs Marines and all fighting men and women to never surrender of their own free will. Commanders are urged to never surrender the members of their command if there is any reasonable chance that resistance can hold out. In the event that they are captured, American soldiers are instructed to resist by any means, attempt escape whenever possible, refuse parole, and provide no information beyond their own name, rank, service number, and date of birth. Above all, they are taught to keep faith with the United States and remain loyal to their country. There's no way to make war anything other than the violent and grueling horror that it is, but mankind has tried to set rules for warfare from the earliest days of civilization. Since the mid-19th century, the nations of the world have generally agreed that there must be some commonly accepted rules of conduct in combat. The Geneva Convention of 1864 is the foundation of modern international law governing war. These laws of war are not binding, so unfortunately they're often ignored and difficult to enforce. But they remain as a professed commitment to humane conduct in dire straits, and there has been some success at implementing them. The United States is actually not a party to the International Court of Justice tied to the laws of war. Not to get super technical, but it has to do with the notion of international law. And we once threw tea in a harbor over that kind of stuff. The laws of war, both their history and current understanding, are taught to all branches of the U.S. military, including the Marines. Handbooks issued to the new recruits and students in the Marines explain some of the fundamental tenets of the laws of war. They are taught to apply proportionally. That is, the force used in combat cannot be more than what is needed to avoid causing unnecessary suffering, to resist using illegal tactics like reprisals, and other matters. Violations of the laws of war by American troops have resulted in prosecutions.